If you take a globe and spin it, observing the kaleidoscope of nations fuzzing together, your finger is still quite likely to stop on yet another scene of economic turmoil. A new flare-up of inflation in South America. Currency instability in parts of Asia. The drumbeats of recession across much of Europe. But then your eye might catch the unexpected vista of Kenya, that compact nation tucked along the Indian Ocean, where a startling thing seems to be happening. A renaissance, both monetary and psychological, appears to be unfolding among the gently rolling highlands and bustling streets. If you were looking for a glimmer of economic revitalization in our unsettled world, you could do a lot worse than consider distant Kenya. Figures released last week show the country's inflation rate easing to 5.7%, a remarkable decline from the previous month's 6.3%, and the lowest level in 2 years. More striking still, Kenya's shilling currency has rocketed nearly 20% higher so far in 2024, vaulting it to become the planet's top-performing currency over that span. No, you didn't mishear that. The sleepy Kenyan shilling, that modest little trade facilitator known mostly to East Africa obsessives, has lately outshone the whole bejeweled panoply of global monies, from the mighty US dollar and British pound to the Russian ruble and Swiss franc. What in the world, you might reasonably ask, is going on here? How has an undistinguished player like Kenya suddenly turned into a tiger on the savannah of international finance? The story is one of hard-learned lessons, government discipline, well-timed reforms, and no small amount of external luck. And at a moment when so much economic news seems torn bad, it's an encouraging reminder of the ingenious paths that human societies can find when they show pluck, self-honesty, and perseverance. At the root of Kenya's salubrious shift, economists say, are two discrete but interrelated trend lines, one involving prudent policies enacted by officials, the other stemming from broader international developments. Let's take each in turn. On the policy front, the key factor was a 1-2 punch of aggressive interest rate hikes, totaling 2.5 percentage points, which the Central Bank of Kenya rolled out in December and February. The first increase, to 11.5% from 9%, marked Kenya's first rate bump in nearly 3 years. The second boost put the benchmark lending rate at its highest level since 2011. Those muscular moves demonstrated Kenya was taking a proactive, front-footed approach to wrestling its inflation menace, at a time when many other nations were dragging their feet. But the rate hikes, however admirable, were always intended as just the start of a broader strategy for quelling rampant price growth that had reached nearly 10% at its heights. Smarter still, Kenyan authorities matched their monetary tightening with broader fiscal rectitude and moves to ease supply-side bottlenecks. New policies streamlined customs procedures that had long gummed up the free flow of imports. Domestic production of staple crops was boosted, as officials directed more acreage to grow corn and other diet staples, reducing reliance on costlier foreign foodstuffs. Together, these efforts demonstrated a heartening whole-of-government mentality that attacked the inflation scourge simultaneously on multiple fronts. Too often, developing nations make the mistake of locking in on a singular, dogmatic policy, be it pegging their exchange rates or insisting on some arbitrary fiscal austerity regimen. Kenya avoided such intellectual capture, deploying multiple levers at once in a flexible, integrated assault. It helped, too, that these policies were deployed by technocratic officials who grasped the assignment's urgency and shunned any temptation to subordinate it to short-term political imperatives. This clear-eyed stance stood in contrast to richer powers like the United States, where politically driven inertia and wishful thinking let inflation rage for a damaging period before a serious response kicked in. That said, Kenya's renaissance hasn't been solely the product of domestic policy genius. External developments also played an indispensable supporting role, and here's where luck intervened on Kenya's behalf. Chiefly, the cooling of the wild global commodity boom of 2022 and 2023 removed a key external source of imported price pressures that had plagued Kenya and many peers in the developing world. As the frenzied wartime spike in energy and agriculture costs abated, some major inflationary drivers simply melted away. On the financial front, too, global conditions swung favorably and helped buoy that spectacular Kenyan currency rally. In late 2023, Kenya pulled off a new $2 billion Eurobond issue that ended up drawing major demand from yield-hungry international buyers. That, in turn, sent the shilling soaring and quelled concerns that had built over Kenya's reliance on external debt. Meanwhile, currency traders were also likely reacting to expectations that the Federal Reserve might need to cut rates aggressively in the face of a U.S. economic slowdown. Tighter money in Kenya, coupled with loosening money in America, a recipe for shilling strength, all else equal. To call these global financial vacillations luck might understate just how catalytic they were. After years of unsuccessfully trying to talk up the shilling's value through import controls and administrative interventions, this external sea change instantly achieved what domestic policymakers could not. The shilling's renaissance happened almost overnight. And that's perhaps the deepest lesson here. For all the virtues of deft governance and administrative reform, and Kenya deserves due credit on those fronts, a great deal still lies outside any nation's direct control in our hyperconnected global economy. External financial tides, shaped by market expectations and faraway events, can dwarf even the best laid of domestic efforts. Yet the triumphs of a place like Kenya are to recognize those external forces as opportunities and capitalize on them with their own complementary initiatives. Rather than bewailing global circumstances as inevitabilities to be endured, smart nations exploit changing conditions as openings to turbocharge their own reform agendas. That mindset, more than any particular policy or crisis response, may be the true hallmark of Kenyan monetary leadership. A spirit of rolling pragmatism. An agile grasp of the global systems in which nations are increasingly embedded. An ethos of making virtue of necessity, lining up one's internal governance with external winds to set sail in promising new directions. This muscle memory and official discipline should serve Kenya well, even as its newfound economics gains almost certainly face headwinds ahead. Already, speculation is rife that the central bank may soon pause or reverse its recent rate hikes, lest higher borrowing costs short-circuit the nation's nascent recovery. Those will be fraught prospects for policymakers to navigate. Yet if Kenya's unlikely resurgence has taught us anything, it's the folly of underestimating what plucky nations can accomplish when they blend administrative smarts, fiscal prudence, and psychological fortitude with the grace to recognize promising new circumstances as they emerge. So while gargantuan military and economic powers like the United States, China, and Russia endlessly rattle their sabers at one another, Kenya may have quietly shown a more humble yet no less inspiring example of national revitalization. In a disordered world grown disdainful of classic governance virtues, the little shilling is staging an unlikely fight back.